Happy Saturday night or Saturday early evening or whatever. I'm still alone, but somebody will eventually watch this when they're not there. So I will get started, I suppose. Um, it's Saturday night. It was another long and starting to get warmer week on the strike lines, which was kind of interesting and also unfortunate all at the same time. Just sort of hate to see it happening. Sort of hate to know that there's no ongoing negotiations. Um, that part really distresses me. The idea that they just don't even want to talk, but it just completely jibes with what I believe is going on, which is that this strike is going to last 100 plus days because it's going to last exactly as long as it takes for the studios to force majeure a bunch of the deals that they don't want to deal with and get rid of. Um, I do think that eventually, like maybe before the 100 days, a couple of people, a couple of studios or entities might peel off from the others and start to talk about separate deals. Not that there's a huge precedent of that happening, but I just think some of them just have different needs out of writers, and that they'll want to get back down to business, or some of them just see it as a smaller part of their business and a lost leader, and they'll just choke on it and get back to business. But we'll find out how unified they really are. We were sort of sold the idea early on that there was one streamer in particular that was holding back on everything, and just felt at the time like maybe that streamer was also sort of taking the hit for all the other streamers who wanted to sort of get the same job done. So if you're just with me, it's just talking about the beginning of about the week and the strike and the continued no negotiations, and how to me that just reinforces my point of view that they're going to take 100 days to force majeure their way out of a bunch of giant deals. And that once they do that, then they'll miraculously start talking and get back to work. But I do think it'll be quicker if the actors and directors go out. But I mean, the directors are always a wild card. You just never know exactly what they're going to do. I sure hope they land on our side because they're a really powerful force to help swing it. But I think the combined WGA and SAG could, if not hasten the end, it could at least begin the process of breaking people off, breaking studios and other financial entities off from others and being more willing to settle. So hopefully that'll end up being the case. We'll find out. But it was a really decent week of, striking. I mean, such as it is, I think the one benefit that most people had, not that you have a tremendous amount of control over it sometimes, but everybody sort of could feel this coming for 6 months or more. And for me, it just felt inevitable from the time of the last, you know, early days of COVID non-negotiation, where they just settled on a deal and moved forward. Like this is what would have happened then if it hadn't been for COVID. And anyway, I just feel like we're going to be settling in for a 100-day thing, but that maybe somebody will peel off from there and decide to make a side deal, and some people will go back. I know personally for me, I hope it's Amazon because I was working on an Amazon show beforehand, and I would certainly like to get back to it before too long. So if you have any questions about any of this stuff, you can hit me up in the questions down there, and I'll handle anyone that comes in. Outside of that, just want to talk a little bit more about the strike stuff this week, and then maybe dive into one of my favorite movies of all time if we end up having enough time to do it justice. Um, I keep meeting writers on the strike lines that I just really respect and admire. And I met this guy this week, who was one of the original writers of the first Jumanji back in 1995. And it was just really fascinating to bump into him and talk to him. And it's funny because I've seen him a couple of times set, sort of having the same conversation with other writers, or sort of getting to know each other and everything. So it's kind of funny. I think he's kind of maybe enjoying the tour, and rightfully should. But a super nice guy who just sort of, I picked his brain about what it was like to go through the process of a big studio blockbuster like that, and what the fallout career wise was, and things like that. And it's like, there were some things that were great to hear. There were some things that I sort of expected it to be that way, but was hoping it wasn't. Including that, that he wrote that movie, and that they went through many many drafts and all that stuff together, and when it was done there were like genuine concerns for each partner in town, using that as a big sample, like they had anticipated to get jobs. If they weren't actively seeking jobs together, it was a real obstacle to be part of a team, to go set things up. And it's like, I mean, I had that experience, and I can't say I faced like a it didn't feel to me like not working with Flanagan on stuff after a while, that there was like a big effect, or that it was really difficult. The biggest effect is just on getting things made as opposed to getting things sold. Getting things made is so director dependent, no matter what no matter what field you're working in these days. I know TV people hate to hear that kind of stuff, but it's like directors have always had a big influence over features because that's the people that the producers believe in and believe to put their money in. And directors are starting to have a big effect over the streamers because the streamers are realizing that they get a predictable product with a director running the show, and it's driving TV people crazy. And I totally get it. I just think it's forcing the truth to the matter that we have three models now in a way that we used to have two. We have the features, system, the studio system to make those features, and we have the studio system to make television, and then we have the streaming way to make television and features combined. And I think they just operate in completely different ways. And it looks like the streaming model, at least in the way that it operates, is going to start to veer more toward traditional Hollywood, with the directors being really the gold element that makes something tangible, as opposed to just being that makes something tangible as opposed to just being a possibility. So, regret that model as much as anybody wants to, but I don't know. Those people who are, it's expensive to pay for these shows, and I understand that they want some sort of level of person where they're like, I know what I'm going to get on film. I think traditional TV is going to make a big rallying point after this strike. I think that the deck has been reshuffled, and that the way we used, it was already heading that way, but I think the way that we used to make and consume television is just going to return in a large way, based on what's going on now. But anyway, I also picked his brain about, having done Jumanji and all that stuff, about like residuals and life after that and all that stuff. And it's like, it sounds like it's like a very great thing that nobody could deny was wonderful, but also not like the panacea, like cure to everything ills, go blow off the rest of your life and chill kind of thing. So I've always had the answer, like I've always had the question in my mind, like how many blockbusters does one have to work on or write in order to achieve some sort of relaxed lifetime status? And the answer I found out this week is definitely more than one. So still working on that. I also think for the first time, you can feel writers getting a little frisky out there. The first couple of weeks, everybody was so shell shocked that I don't think anybody really sort of thought creatively or anything. But talking to people this week, everybody's sort of like feeling that anxiety of like, oh man, I really want to do something. I really want to do something. So I get the feeling there'll be a bunch of really interesting specs out in the world when this is over. And I just want to say to my pre-WGA friends, the real truth about leading up to the strike wasn't that the town went quiet. It was the town went quiet on anything beyond a certain, perceived level of writer, and that every one of those writers, this guy included, sorry, wanted to go out and make a deal and get things done beforehand that would sort of like help through it and beat that deadline and everything. And that's really why the few months beforehand really seemed to fall quiet and shy. It was because all those people were running around and making those deals. And I think when we come back out of this strike, there's going to be essentially, like, if you're talking about windows of opportunity and when it's time to get back in action, when the strike is over, I would assume the same way that the first 4 to 6 weeks or so, maybe 4, 6, 8 weeks after the strike ends, are going to be literally consumed by, writers flooding the market with their stuff. And that the ones who are going to get the most attention are like the big A-list people. And then it'll trickle down to sort of the working class. And then eventually, once that bubble is over, I think that, after that bubble, there's going to be the really indicative times of what the post-strike world looks like. And if I had to guess what the post-strike world looks like, I would say that the deck has been reshuffled, and that just like in other major work stoppages in Hollywood throughout history, when it resumes, it's not going to be just like it was when people stepped away. It never is. And it never really was the same, like after everybody fired their agents, or after COVID, or after this or that. Like after any of these things that I've been through, after 2007, 2008 strike, it was a completely different world, and sort of opened up and switched more into this streaming thing where we ended up in such a boom for a few years. Like, it's never the same. It's an ever evolving animal. And there's going to be a new version of it that comes out. And in a lot of ways, that's an opportunity for people who are pre-WGA or not yet, haven't crossed that barrier, to be regarded in a way that the others are too. It's like a resetting of the perceptions of Hollywood is usually what happens. And they're going to be looking for good stuff. And there's going to be a period of time. I I can't say, you guarantee anything, but traditional Hollywood wisdom says that the shakeups that happen after these major events often benefit new writers. with the ability to slip into the system, because a bunch of other older, more experienced writers slip away by attrition or can't get a foothold when things come back, or sort of seen as like a, a relic of a previous style of doing business. And that's, that's a tough perception to beat in this town. And very few people come back from it. I know a few who deserve it, and I know a few who are doing it and doing it great, but for the most part, that's the way it works. So that's why most people try to stay in the game, and you really don't see people take extended breaks anymore or do stuff, because they just really want to like keep at the top of their game and stay in it as long as you possibly can. So anyway, like I said, if there's any questions, drop anything down below. It's good to see you. I'm gonna dive in and talk about something near and dear to my heart for a little while, but please interrupt me with any questions that you have. Um, when I was like, like 11 or 12 years old, I watched Casablanca on Channel 45, the independent little UHF station in Baltimore, Maryland, and really just was shocked by what I was seeing, because I was, I think like a lot of people, just, I believed that this movie was going to be boring, and this movie wasn't going to be anything that I could care about, and that, if I felt like getting up off the chair and turning the channel like you had to do in those days, I would probably do it eventually when I got sick of it. And as I sucked in right at the moment when Peter Lorre is on the run. So it took me a long time to actually see the very, very beginning, but I was stuck from then on. And it was funny. I just want to talk about the beginning. First, I'll look at Haji says, I'm an older writer. Why does it seem so hard for 40 plus writers to break in? I think it's hard for everybody to break in at any level at any time, like for real. But I think the reason maybe some people at different ages, or any other perceived difference from the classic sad traditional face of the Hollywood writer, feels that difficulty is because it's already really, really hard, and then it gets harder as you begin to slide out of a shared demographic with the young executives who are the first level of people that you meet. But those executives are like 24, 26, 27, really hardly ever past that. They're the first line of defense in these studios and these production companies. And they really like the energy, like we all do. I think the energy of people they relate to and can talk to and all that stuff. And so I just think it becomes perception, it's already a tiny little bullseye to hit. You have any other thing that deviates from the perceived formula of success, and there's a problem. But I will say this: features, especially TV, it might take a bit to break through in that, but features, it's really about what's on the page. And if you got it on the page, I listen, I can hear people out there, let's cop out. Of course, you say that, this, that, all those other things. Listen, I know it's hard to get those doors open, and it seems impossible sometimes from the other side to get them there. It wasn't easy for all but a very, very few people, and they all had some sort of hand up that that most leg up in the business that most of us don't. For those of us who didn't have any sort of real hardcore entree into the business handed to us, it's difficult. It took me 8.5 years to sell something, and I was, I was in a lucky position at that point in my life where I didn't do a tremendous amount. Like I wasn't challenged by the work I was doing in life, and I was really mentally free to pursue this every single day. And it just took a really long time. Anyway, so sorry about sorry that it feels like it's taken a, that it's really hard. It's just sadly a factor of the fact that it is. I mean, it's a really desirable job. Every day, another, 1,000 people show up on a Greyhound bus in downtown Los Angeles who move here and want to do this job. You know what I mean? And most of them are pretty good and pretty confident and pretty cocky, and are going to go out there and work it pretty hard, just like I did and just like you did. You know what I mean? Um, so anything that's that competitive is hard to hold on to. I remember when a friend told me that, like, the thing about NFL players when they talk to each other, that they would say NFL means is not for long. And I feel like there's a certain element of that for screenwriting too. It's like, you have a moment, and if you're lucky you get two or three moments to shine through. And then the industry has sort of like moves on, and you find yourself in anachronism without knowing it. And I'm not there yet, but you can definitely see the end in the distance. You know what I mean? So what do you think was your biggest barrier to break? Why do you think it took you? as long as it took. Professional reasons and creative reasons. Creative reasons, the number one reason it took me so long was it took me a really long time to figure out how to rewrite or even to be interested in rewriting. And the real truth is, you can occasionally knock out a gem in a couple of days and just put something together that's just fantastic and it works and people love it. But most often you spend a whole lot of time working hard on these things and getting through, and most of the really great work of the sort of back half of my career, the last like 12 years or so, has been the on the back of rewriting and really digging in and making sure that I got the most out of every piece of this thing that I could get and that it made the most sense and all that stuff. So learning to rewrite was really a big impediment. I mean, and just like honestly, if I want to talk about the other thing, it was like I was really good at the social game of this town and meeting people and getting myself out there and making people like me enough to spark things off into setting up meetings and stuff like that, which was really hard. But I was also a like young guy in my mid 20s who was under the spell of my favorite band, who would refuse to ever try and refuse to be seen trying and refuse to sell out and cater to a system that would mean that they had to show that they cared about that system in order to have a hit. And I unfortunately lived that lifestyle for a long time and threw away casually gigantic things that came in the wake of my first couple of sales that I think if I had latched onto those in a different way and played the game in a smarter way as a business person instead of somebody who was fancying themselves as suddenly, cool and smart, I think if I just treated myself as a business person early in that time, I would have propelled myself a lot further, a lot faster. That was really the two barriers that it took me. I waited too long to rewrite. Once I did, I became a lot better, and my stuff became a lot better and a whole lot better received. I also, threw away opportunities that were handed to me out of some sort of self-conscious 80s kid Gen X thing of not wanting to be seen trying too hard or caring too much or not putting yourself out there to win in a way that was going to let you win lest you fail. Like the way to protect yourself from putting yourself out there and failing was to just pull back and sabotage those things. So silly. But then it sort of grew up a little bit and sort of got faced with periods where I would sort of like run out of money from I was still lucky enough and sort of like blazing stuff out enough that I could occasionally catch on and go sell something and renew my lifestyle for another year and a half. But eventually it had to be strung together in a way that was going to be more meaningful than I was just doing then. Hey Ken, how you doing? Now I'm nervous because you're here. I worked as a first assistant editor for almost 18 years before I did my first studio film. You never give up, keep going. Exactly. It's like you just, and I tell you, all the steps along the way are never horrifying. It's like you're going to look back at the stage you're in right now as like proverbially and literally as like the good old days, and you're gonna laugh about it, and you're gonna see so many things that you could have adjusted for yourself earlier if you'd decided to. And it's just some you can teach only so much. Like I do these Zooms and I do this kind of stuff, and it's like most of it is designed to sort of like try to save people time or impart a few things that might help them, make decisions better than I did. And you can take in a lot of that information, but a lot of it practically too, you sort of have to learn on the fly for yourself in order to like really believe it. Which is the sad part. I wish I could take everybody aside and say, no, 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 for real, pay attention. Like this will all matter. You know what I mean? But and I think some people do take it to heart, and I've seen some really quick advancing because of that. And some people are just like, just because this guy made a zillion mistakes doesn't mean I will. So it happens. Haji said too, I'm new and just trying, so I know it'll take a minute. I've just heard from other writers who've been trying way longer than I have. So I was just wondering, I mean, the thing about it is you don't know how long it's going to take you, because the real reality of this thing is it's not just your talent. It's not just your perseverance. It's not just your networking. It's also your luck. And it's a difficult pill to swallow sometimes, this idea that there's a certain amount of luck involved in this business, but it really is. But still, if you were the luckiest person in the world and you haven't done all the work ahead of time, when that lucky break comes, you won't get it anyway. So it's like luck is the residue of preparation. The better prepared you are to attack this business, the better off you'll do. And I tell you, if I was talking to you just person to person, what I would tell you is to take a cue from LA natives. I really like working with LA natives. LA natives in the industry have a very specific way of dealing with it, which is, I grew up in this town, in an industry town. This is the industry in my industry town, and I'm just going to work in it like a job. And it's not this thing where they saved and scrimped and, dreamed about moving across the country to the dream factory and all that stuff. For them, it's just the industry in the town where they grew up, and they're coming to go work in it. And that kind of workaday attitude, treating it like a job, once I started doing that, that also really, really helped me. I didn't, I treated it like a dream factory for a long time. And like this thing, like I know a lot of you do, because I've heard it from you personally, where it's like, all my hopes and dreams are in this, like, this is the one I've worked really hard on this. This is the big one that I'm going to push through, and the one that's going to make me. Looking back, the real reality of getting into this business is there was never one single moment where you're like, made it in. You know what I mean? It was like a series of small stepping stones leading up to that first sale check thing. And then, the minute, sorry to deviate from what we're talking about here, but the minute I got it, I became instantly consumed with, we must make the next one happen soon. We sold our first script, me and my then writing partner, in July of 1999, which I'll never forget and very specifically always remember. The first big studio deal that we got. We'd sold things and option stuff and this and that, like smaller things, but this was like Sony buying a major script. You know what I mean? And instantly, the only goal I set for me and my writing partner in the immediate wake of that was, let us repeat this before the end of the year. Because if we can get ourselves out there and do this again before the end of the year, then we know we got a career on our hands instead of some crazy fluke. And we dug down and we went out and we met the whole circuit of town and found that second job and just really pursued it hard and really worked our asses off to make sure that that second job would happen within the course of that year, so that we wouldn't be a fluke. And we didn't. We came really close at a few different places, but we just could not get it done, even in the wake of like a really big sale that had been really well received. And it took us almost, I guess, about a year and a half maybe to get that second one. And then we started putting them together in a more regular way. But it's just as hard once you get in. And as much as you got a plan now and you've been working it now, once you sell that first thing or do that first job, it doesn't end. It literally continues along the same way until you can prove to yourself that you've got to figured out a way to do it consistently. And the way to do it consistently is, like I've often said, is, talent, perseverance, networking, and luck. You've got to network yourself out there once you're in, just like you did before you're in. If you sit back and rely on your new agents or your new manager to handle everything, that's the people that end up poor in 18 months and knocking on the door of a bank, or their parents are using credit cards. You know what I mean? You gotta prepare for it all along, plant little money bombs in your future, have different things at different stages of development all the time, knowing that anything anywhere could flake out at any given time. That's why you need a bunch. And it causes you to subdivide your brain in a way that you're not actually used to doing. So another one of the things I try to get people to do in these Zooms is like, learn how to outline and learn how to compartmentalize these stories. Because if you're outlining several of them, you can advance them through in different stages and keep everything running as you're developing with three different producers chasing that second sale, which is what you're going to need to do. So yeah, you're going to compartmentalize and expand your brains out in ways that you haven't quite fully comprehended yet, but your survival instinct will kick in. Once you're doing this for a living and it's what you're depending on to pay the bills, your survival instinct kicks in, and some adrenalized part of your brain will say, don't let up, keep attacking, set up as many of these things as I can. Some of them prospective things, some of them definitely leading to jobs, some of them jobs I'm generating on my own by speccing them. It's always been the way, and I think it will always be the way. Be your own best rep by making sure that you have a giant repertoire of things to go out there into the world. What else have we got? Drake, I must remember what. I don't know what that one means. Sorry. By business person, do you mean operating as more as a writer producer? No, I mean, it's a business, and even being a writer is a business. And I just sucked at comprehending the business of being a writer. Once I broke in, I thought, oh, now I can sit back and just write scripts and have ideas, and oh, my ideas have value in the marketplace and all that stuff. It was like, nope, your life will always be spent, once you do this, mystical breakthrough, you will spend usually more time living a life that is a combination of high school speech class and used car sales than you will actually typing. you'll spend 2/3 of your time in high school speech class, used car sales, and 1/3 of your time typing. But it's worth it. It's still better than anything else. You know what I mean? It's like, would I go back, would I recommend it to somebody who really had the stuff to keep going and try and do all that stuff? Yeah, it's totally worth it. AI. Can the toothpaste really be squeezed back into the tube? Is the fight about not allowing studios to use it to cut writers out, or is the goal to make AI not come into play at all? Look, I'm not a negotiator. I'm not one of these people making this thing, but my perception of AI is like, it's there now. It exists. The fact that we picked it as an issue at this time means that we're worried about it. The fact that they're pushing back on it and won't even talk about it means that they have plans for it. There's nothing we can do about that. They own these businesses and they're going to do what they want with whatever technology that they have. But we're also the audience, and our friends, the audience, are also nationwide. And a bunch of people may love this AI tech and these generated artificial movies and TV shows for a little while because you can stick your face on the actor, or you can do this, or you can do that. But eventually, even the lamest of these people is going to want to go out on a Friday night with some friends or a date. And the mass audience is going to get sick of it the same way they get sick of 3D, the same way they get sick of every other little novelty that came along. They're going to get sick of it and they're going to want the human touch. And if these companies commit to making all this stuff all in and all the way, all they're going to do is cut off their arms and legs and reduce their level of audience participation down to a bare minimum. And that's going to create a good old world opportunity and for new companies or established smaller companies or whoever to step up with their own financing and make these movies and TV shows and distribute them right through those same old places who will certainly take them no matter as long as there's an audience. It's not like they're going to say there'll never be a non-AI on my platform. So all they'll do is make themselves obsolete by completely pursuing this thing. I think the real goal with it is to augment human beings and cut human beings down to the bare minimum, because that's the goal of every single one of these tech people with money who shows up and buys any company anywhere. How do I to make it profitable and desirable to Wall Street, I need to suck out a certain amount of profit every year. But anybody who's spent any amount of time studying the film industry and the TV industry of the last, 80 and 100 years respectively, knows that there are very few profits to suck out of this thing. And that most often more people just crash and burn on the giant corporate level in all those places. The classic Warner Brothers, the classic Universal never ran at some big giant profit. They ran just enough to keep the business rolling and reinvest what little they had back into making it bigger each single time. But they were always on the fringe. The Mirish brothers who owned United Artists, none of these people ever got like stinking personally rich. They always made a great living, but they didn't develop like, Rockefeller or Morgan style money from doing these things, because they cared about the art of it and they took chances on human beings and stories that their gut told them there was good, just besides their own internal algorithm. And some of those would pay off huge and some of them would tank, and they would usually always hopefully even out, and they were always very careful to try to even out in that way so that they could just keep going. So it's just not historically a profitable business, which is why Wall Street is always kept away from this thing. But these tech people have so much money that they just acquire stuff and they don't even think, they just think everything will bend to their system, and this one just will not. These things are, it's not like these things have long been and always been handcrafted by people for people, and for people to relate to them, they're going to need to continue to do that. So even if every existing company that existed out there right now, every distribution method that there was and every finance method that there was, suddenly said they were only going to make AI, others would just spring up to take the place because it's too important to the audience. And the audience isn't going to just turn on a dime and trade it all in for a fad. So if they want to make themselves obsolete by pursuing that path, that's fine. I don't think that's what they intend to do. I think they intended to use it as this augmenting thing to save and cut costs, because their idea was, well, we do these early rooms, we do these early tests, or we do these early drafts, and they're always just, compiled pieces of, I almost cursed, Marsha, but I caught myself. Aren't you happy? They suck. You know what I mean? And it's like, so if this draft sucks, it's just the same. We'll just start with the second writer and go in and do it and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, like I said, 3D, for a while there, everything in the world was going to be 3D and it was all over for movies. And then, boom, we were back. For a while, it was going to be television, cable, color, sound, widescreen, cinema scope, all this stuff. And it's like these big doomsday things never end up happening. AI will come out of the bottle, then people will get sick of it, and then it won't matter anymore. And that's the best way to face it. I worry about the posturing that we're doing right now, where so many of us just act like we're afraid of this thing. What we should say is, dude, if you want to pursue a destructive path that so many of your forebears have taken only to end up belly up, knock yourselves out. But there's going to be somebody out there who's going to show up with a bunch of money and want to make some movies and get down to business. And we'll all be there to work with them. I'm not as afraid of AI as people are, because if it comes, it's just going to be one more thing that makes it harder until it burns itself out. And there's a whole new group of people who will maybe do business in a different way too. It's like, if one of our biggest problems is that we're looking at some stodgy old places, or some tech bros who are now 50 or 60 and want to, continue to run things a certain way, well, maybe having them self-flush themselves out of the industry and rebooting it with a whole different set of entrepreneurs and their own money to come into this thing is the best thing for all of us in the end. It's going to hurt right now, but every single one of these changes is hurt right now. It's going to end careers that were 3/4 of the way through because of the inability to adapt to this new thing, or just hating it, or whatever that stance that they take. So did all the other previous ones that came in. It's a tough business. It's a cyclical business, and it's just not designed. Nobody gets to be Billy Wilder and make movies in 6 different decades anymore. You know what I mean? Clint Eastwood might be the last one to come along and do this stuff, because it's just evolved again into a more lean profit machine. I think his audiences will reject it. I tweeted the other day something that, whatever, pissed people off, but it was like, I just get a lot of nasty things. I'm sorry, I don't like the Eagles, everybody. It's not some reference to the Big Lebowski. I just don't like the Eagles. And I just think when corporate rock was the big thing and you couldn't hear anything else, punk came along, real punk, and knocked it all on its ass. And we didn't have to worry about it quite as much anymore. And I think that's what happens with movies and TV. And I think it's what will happen this time if something like that goes down. So sorry to go off on that stuff, but this AI thing is worrying, right? And some of the people I really respect the most seem bigly, badly worried about it. And I'm just like, do not, if we demonize this enemy, we're giving the studios all this turf to just think that, to feel like they can push us around. What we got to say to them is, gimmicks don't work, dude. Human brains making stories for human beings work. I don't think we're all ready to go live the Wall-E existence yet, although I do like it on vacation, which it's been a while, but I feel like there's kind of one now. All right, Drake. Hey, buddy. I'm a 19-year-old aspiring writer-director. Feel the urge to make something by 25, even though I know it's quite unlikely. I mean, there's the 26 rule of Orson Welles, which was always the one. Like, Orson was 26 when he shot Kane, 27 when it was released. It's like that was always a benchmark for filmmakers at a certain point. Look, you want the best way to go make your Drake is do what Birthday Boy Mike Flanagan did, and crowdfund a small feature and just show what you can do. Just break even on costs, have the tiniest crew, and if even one, cast actually talented people, write something from your heart that you can go make on a scale and make it. Most of the great directors do that. And it's like, yes, did privileged, middle-aged white doofus just say, just go make it? Yeah, but I'll say this about 2023. We've all got phones, we've all got access to sort of do these things. I know it's piecemeal and all that stuff, but it's like, if I needed to right now, I know I could recruit 2 or 3 people to help me finish off some feature or a short that I would go shoot with my phone. And I got to guarantee that I bet you've got that in your lives too. So it's like, 15 years ago or 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it was a big point of privilege to just say, go shoot your movie. Today, it's almost egalitarian out. You know what I mean? You really can make something that looks and sounds and feels great practically on your own. Soderbergh keeps doing it again and again. So hopefully it's not I apologize if it is, but hopefully it's not one of those privileged things anymore to say, go make your movie. But if you really want to make a movie by 25 or whatever, you can definitely go do it. I would do it a few times. There's this guy in Texas, this lovely young man named Jannard Harper, who tracked me down on Facebook and then Twitter years ago. And I've tried to help and mentor a little bit here and there along the way when he pops up on the radar or anything. But this guy, with a couple of kids at home and a wife, and just not like a spring chicken. I mean, I think I'm sure he's a guy in his 30s. Just went out and reinvented himself as a guy who made like $50,000 and $75,000 movies for Tubi, and puts these movies out on Tubi a few times a year, and is making a living from cranking out and making exactly what he always wanted to do, which is very Houston centric, Jannard's voice horror. And he keeps putting it out there on Tubi, and people keep watching, and he gets paid every month. You know what I mean? So I just can't tell you. I mean, this time, even the distribution stuff has been knocked. I got a friend I've known for 30 years, this guy, Daryl Wharton Rigby, who lives in Japan. He's from Baltimore, like me. And he worked on the show Homicide back in the day, like an early Barry Levinson cop show, sort of in the vein of The Wire, like a predecessor to The Wire, and a bunch of things like that. And a couple of years ago, he shot a feature called Stay in Japan that looks and sounds and feels as great as any of the Hollywood stuff that I've seen, and did it really on next to nothing, and just sort of like decided to make it happen. And he's got it out there on Amazon Prime, and I recommend it to as many studio people as I can when I'm talking. I mean, he's a real talent who just keeps going out there and doing his thing. So you can go get it, Drake. You may not get, you might not get a Ryan Johnson movie and $175 million of funding, but you can definitely make your movie and get it out there and get it seen and get yourself to that level. So don't think that it's impossible to do. Just go do it. I got to work on rewriting, and the too cool for the room attitude is common. I see that in advertising with copywriters and art directors. We want to make it, but be rebels too. Yeah, it's so silly. It's like, I really was just a Gen X kid. And as a Gen X kid, I was just like, you know, you weren't supposed to try. You weren't supposed to care to enter some corporate thing. You were supposed to be an outsider who just sort of made it in your own way. And I just really wanted to be a studio system guy and really crash that thing. And I, at the time, my goal was I want to take Brian Helgeland's spot on this top 10 writer thing. Like, I want to be on that top 10 list, and I'll knock Helgeland off, because he had just written LA Confidential, and I was so jealous because it was a book that I loved, and it turned into a movie that I really, really loved, despite couple of silly flaws that I really love. And yeah, I just think that was my goal. And like, that's what I told myself all the time: be that guy, knock Helgeland off the list. Now I'm like, oh Christ, I hope nobody's gunning for me. Hollywood's 39th best screenwriter. Um, anyway, how much of your sales have been spec scripts of your own idea versus projects you were hired to write? I mean, the first bunch of times they were all, specs. Like the first, from the mid 90s through 2013 or so, they were all just specs that I generated. Or like, if it was the one big sort of, one of the big studio ones that I did in that time had a Ron Howard attachment. That was a book that I had gotten the rights to just by, supremely hustling and finding the Jesuit priest author who wrote this nonfiction book, and begging and crying and all those things that you do to get somebody on your side. But yeah, they were all things that I brought to the table. And then after you start getting stuff made, uh, some people hope that and for some people, I think it starts when you start selling things. For me, it was once things start getting made. Once things got made, people would bring you stuff or say, hey, here's something I think is in your wheelhouse, your perceived wheelhouse, or that's when stuff would come in. So I think it's really, you're going to be a self-generator until the moment you're not. I think the funny thing is that we're self-generators early in our careers at the time when we need it the most. And we sometimes generate so much that we strike and strike away at the matchbook cover until the point where there's not a whole lot of original left. And then you break yourself in, you get to this point, they start offering you things. And it just becomes easier in a certain sense to say, oh, I know what to do with this, or I know what to do with that. It's like you're already starting like 50% of the way through the process, instead of the one of just completely making it up yourself. And I think the reason we all fall for the IP thing, and I sold an original show with John Carpenter, like, an original idea. Could I have done it without Carpenter? I don't know. Probably not. You know what I mean? But it's like, it was an original idea. But I've been working on a lot of IP stuff, especially since going to CAA, and I love it. And I'm very happy to be there and be doing this stuff. But I miss that sort of like cowboy taking a chance on yourself with your own ideas and things and putting them out there into the arena and knowing that they could compete as big as this other stuff. At this age and stage with kids and a future educations and stuff to pay for and take care of, I really like the IP because it's flowing with the stream in a way that doesn't have to cause you to reinvent the wheel every few months when you go out there and seek the new job. By accepting IP and working in the IP biz, it's okay, big guy, come on. By accepting IP and working in the IP biz, you allow yourself to be a couple of steps ahead. And it's like, what is that? Well, it's another one of those advantages that established writers get. And again, I apologize, but I look forward to each of you getting it. You know what I mean? Like, work yourself now hard, because however hard you work yourself now, it's really just training for how hard they're going to work you. The first few people who worked me over were like Neil Moritz and Brian Grazer and people like that, who were just, hardcore pros who just know how to use writers and really and drain the best stuff and get the most out of them. And, so I felt like I sort of had an education sort of coming up working for people who were very demanding and very picky. And I tagged a lot of my self-esteem towards hitting the bullseye of making these dudes happy. You know what I mean? One of my best experiences early on was with Gail Ann Hurd, who I'm working with again on something now. And she was super supportive, and it was a fully original idea and a weird one and strange. And because she just liked it, she attached herself and helped us move it along. And it was like, I don't know, it sort of taught me something about Hollywood. And I mean, don't, whatever. This is not what I found out early on was that I far preferred working with women in positions of power than men. Never had much. I'm a dude. I'm a guy. I know what it's like to be a guy. Been around guys all the time. I get enough of it. You know what I mean? But it's like it's always more interesting to be around women. And professionally, what I've discovered too is that the way that women go about their business and like to collaborate and work with you is a little bit different from some of these guy producers. And it wasn't all about ego and asserting themselves and like making sure their point of view was number one. It was actually much more about what's best for this story, what's best for this project, what's best for this, this movie or this show to move it forward. And I really appreciate that. Not kissing up or anything. It's just always the way it's been. And until recently, like my whole representation team and all of that stuff has always been that. Wow, we really ended up getting into a bunch of questions. I really kind of wanted to dive. That's my little dude, Sam. I really wanted to dive into a bunch of Casablanca, but let me see if there's any of these others. Sorry. And Marcia, if you're out there, if there's anything that I missed, I think that might be, I just finished shooting my first feature with 5 full-time people. It was a crap load of work, but fun as hell. You can do it. Absolutely. You need fewer. I believe now, strangely, that if you're going to go out and do one of these guerrilla style features, the fewer people, the better. Don't beg, borrow, and steal from too many people. Save that for talent. The main things you need to focus on for sure are that first off, you write a great script, you direct the hell out of it, number one. Number two, make sure that the people on camera are great, because there's no hiding it if they're not. It's really hard to cover for those performances. Like, work and make sure and beg, borrow, and steal, put your energy into that. The second thing to put your energy into is a camera person, a person who really knows how to get that look. And then the third thing to put your time and energy into is a really professional edit and mix when it's over. It's like that's where that's what you can never give up on those things, because they are the destruction of so many small indie films. You write a script for free, you direct for free, you talk everybody that you can into working for free. You keep that to 3, 4, 5 people, you might be able to pull it off, and put any resources that you have into good talent and good post. You do everything else for free, but don't trust that and don't leave that stuff to chance. If you leave that stuff to chance, you're asking for trouble, and the whole enterprise falls apart because you decided to skimp on the one section you just can't skimp on, So, all right. So listen, we got a few more minutes. If other questions come in, that's totally great. But just before we go, I just want to say, I am not one of those people who believes if you don't know the whole history of film or the golden age of cinema or any of that kind of stuff, that if you haven't studied all these old movies and everything, like, you hear some people, they're like, well, how could you be in this business and not do that? I think that's nonsense. I think that there's people who have utterly original talents that come just from themselves. One of my favorite stories about it is like Spike Jonze when he was making the Being John Malkovich, and Malkovich was on set, and Spike Jonze was directing him, and Malkovich went a little over the top, and Spike asked him to sort of hold it back a little bit, and Malkovich was like, "Oh yeah, I was a little too blanched there, right?" And Spike Jonze had no idea what that meant or what that reference was about or anything. And Malkovich was like, "Oh God, who is this person who doesn't know anything?" And he looked at sort of the other producer, and the producer was like, "Hey, it's not going to be a derivative movie." You know what I mean? Just completely original. So I just like that stuff. I don't think you need to know these things. But if I was going to recommend, 10 old movies, like, and by old movies, I mean prior to 1960, I'm sorry to say. I know that now an old movie is prior to 2000, but just for the purposes of what we're talking about here, I'm talking about like 1934 to 1959, and there's probably like 100 movies in there that I love. There's 10 or so that I would recommend that it's worth knowing and worth mining. And the big daddy of all of them is Casablanca. I My thing about movies is I want a tone, and TV too, I guess, but it's like I want a tone that is like life. Like I don't like to pigeonhole myself into one particular tone. This is a thriller, this is a comedy, this is a romance. It's like I want to patch myself into a thing that's very much like life, which is sometimes funny, sometimes romantic, sometimes scary, sometimes there's a song, sometimes there's a scare, sometimes there's a death. It's like, but in life you have all of those things, and I love entertainment that incorporates them all. And for me, like Singing in the Rain, I saw go by earlier, which is like one of my top three favorite movies, and to me encapsulates all the things that a movie can be. Raiders of the Lost Ark, my maybe my favorite movie of all time, uh, encapsulates everything that a movie can be. It has all the different stuff in it, and for me, Casablanca is a perfect example of having everything in it that a movie could be. It's a romance, and that's what most people know about it, but it's also a sort of a docudrama political thriller. And it's also a buddy movie, and it's also a comedy, and it's also a musical. It's got so many little facets to it that are amazing. And the most impressive thing about it to me is like it was destined to be a B movie. Like it was originally designed to just be a pretty mediocre B movie, but there was something about the original play, Everybody Comes to Rick's, that just sparked to people because it was about hope. It was about people who were gathered together at a time when the world was uncertain, and some of them had hope for a better future, and some of them had despair that the future was never going to be good. And I don't know any time where that's been more timely or real since then than now. I feel like everybody is sort of somebody stuck in Casablanca waiting for an exit visa and the plane to Lisbon, but here we are. So just like the people in Casablanca, there's now this new life that everybody has to sit and make the best of. And in Casablanca, there's this huge cast of characters. You know, we know a few of them, but I mean, there's a really large cast in this movie, and they all operate in this place that's meant to be a way station, but it's becoming ever more permanent. And it's like I feel like that's the way where like a few years ago we were also hopeful, like, oh, this whole COVID thing or whatever, this whole era of our times will just go away and we'll go back. And it's like, you know what, shit, you never quite go back, do you? You know what I mean? It's always ever forward, and we may not be able to ever sort of recapture that. Just like these people in Casablanca, we're never going to have the beautiful vision of the future that they thought. They were all waiting to get to America as they fled from Nazi held territory, and anyway, it just feels very representative. And the way that the movie eases us into the world is also very nice. Like a lesser script, a today's script would tell us, hey, you know what? We got this Humphrey Bogart, we got this Rick, we got this Ingrid Bergman, we got this Ilza. We better get the two of these together by page 15, and we better, have them, have some serious feelings by 25. And what you get when you watch a movie like Casablanca and you look at it through what happened to it in a modern studio system is you realize that like the pace of storytelling has become so important to people that they've placed all of this weight of the story on the first 20, 30 minutes of a story instead of distributing it evenly throughout. And what we end up with now is a lot of bombastically overloaded, noisy, and layered act ones that then lead to some really long fall apart second halves of second acts where the movies just go off a cliff or the shows sort of die in episodes 5, 6, and 7. And it's like, what if we just treated the audience the way that they treated the audience back then, and we anticipated that they were actually bright enough to come in and sit and enjoy this show, this movie, and know that they were in the hands of people who were going to give them the goods and take them where they needed to go, but they weren't in a hurry to get there. They weren't in a hurry to get there and took their time by letting us live in the world. So Casablanca's first few minutes are just literally, it opens with some narration about Casablanca itself and how it's become a way station, for migrants trying to leave Europe and Northern Africa and Eastern Europe and a bunch of other places ahead of the Nazis and the war. And as we learn about it, what we see is that they're waiting here. They're like ever waiting to be moved forward, ever waiting to get away. And then we go right into a piece of thing that is very generic, it would seem at first, but actually turns out to be something super duper important to what's to come, which is the murder of these two German couriers, two Nazi couriers, as we should call them, because they're Nazis. Two Nazi couriers stole what is something completely made up for the movie, letters of transit, letters that were so important that once signed and dated, no one, not even Hitler himself, could question the travel plans of these people, which is like a great crazy golden ring magic wand kind of made up thing for a movie, but it really works in this world. And these two golden magic tickets out of this place that everybody wants to get out of are now out there somewhere. Two Nazi couriers have been murdered and they've been taken. And like Rick will say later on about Rick, Humphrey Bogart's character, the eyes and ears lead of Casablanca, will later say, like, yesterday they were just two German couriers. Today they're the honored dead. It's like an early little glimpse into how he feels about these, at least how he presents himself as feeling about these things. And then what happens after that? Just real quick, just go through these things. Is like the Nazi major, Major Strasser, the villain of the piece, arrives on the only plane that comes in and out, and Louis, Captain Renault, greets him, and they meet together, and they we see that Louis is, he's Vichy France. He's part of the France that remains free but cooperates with the Nazis, but has their own ostensible freedom so far. And then together, what we find out is, they're looking for these letters of transit, and Louis tells them, "Don't worry, we know who got them, and we're going to pick them up tonight at Rick's." Everybody comes to Rick's, and what they set up is an amazing central location to this movie that really is the beating heart of the place. And later, 3/4 of the way through the movie, or 7/8 of the way through the movie, when Humphrey Bogart's character sells it to so when he sells it to one of his competition, it really feels like an end of an era and a sad thing. But this Rick's place is a really beautiful place, a saloon, what they call it, with gambling in the back and a kitchen and a couple of bars and live music, mostly provided by Sam, the piano player, who is Rick's touring companion and best friend, and always hinted at that they sort of had worked together before in underground causes. Anyway, and so, we have the big set piece to introduce Rick's, and we meet Rick, Humphrey Bogart, and we meet Sam, and we meet the setting, and it's like, it's a fun place, and it's a place where these people who are in the depths of something really serious can come and just forget about it for a little while. And it just like happens all the time, Nazis come in and just ruin it. You know what I mean? And it's like, Peter Lorre plays Ugarte, the man who's ended up with these letters of transit. And he's asked Rick to hide them for him, and Rick knows what they are, but doesn't want to know. And basically, when Ugarte is going to be caught by them, he comes to Rick and pleads and pleads. It's like an early precursor of the Miller's Crossing, like, "Look into your heart" scene, where he's like, Rick, you must help me. And Rick doesn't do anything, sits back, lets the Nazis take this guy away, lets him pull him off. And his little cold rejoinder about the whole thing is that I stick my neck out for nobody. And what we're presented with in scene after scene after scene in the first 40% or so of Casablanca is this man, Rick, who is a cipher. He's a 38-year-old American from New York. He can't return to his home country, although nobody knows why. He runs this saloon. He's got his own code where he will never have a drink with customers. He'll never fraternize with these people. He doesn't get involved in their stories. But at the same time, when presented with an opportunity where, like, Louis, his buddy, is going to exploit a young married woman to accept her favors in exchange for an exit visa, Rick will rig the gambling of the woman's husband in order for him to win enough money to just pay for the exit visa with a bribe instead of the wife issue. And it's like, this guy cares. And then later on, what we find out in a very clever scene where the Nazis are talking to Rick and they have a little dossier about him, and they're going through all these things, and it's funny. He's like, "Are my eyes really brown?" and all this stuff. But what they say is, when he's talking to Louis, about his past in very oblique terms. He says, "Oh, you worked for the loyalists in Spain, and you worked for the this and that." And he's like, Rick says, "Yes, and I was well paid by every single time." And then Louis says, "Well, but the winning side would have paid you more." And it's the one time we're treated to a genuine internal Rick insight in the first half of the movie. And what we walk away knowing about this guy is the tough guy facade is hiding pain and caring. And he's a person with a real beating heart who cared too much. Even if he was a mercenary, some people assert he's a mercenary. I mean, there's a thin line, but even if he was a mercenary, he was a mercenary for causes that he really believed in. And he's now existing on that thing where he's too raw of a nerve. He has too much heart and he cares too much. So to protect himself, he's had to shut it all off and become the Rick that we know. And it's only ever intimated at, but I live in a life where I'm for certain that he is that person. And when we see him later in and you know what happens. I mean, if you don't, you should really. This is one to watch. It's just so fun, and stick with it because I know the pacing is different, but the heart of it is so real. What ends up happening is Ingrid Bergman, Ilsa, a woman that he was very much in love with in Paris before fleeing the Nazis, arrives in Casablanca with her husband, who it turns out is like the big underground figure, the one that the Nazis fear, the one who inspires hope in the underground, somebody who is showing half the world, hey, the Nazis and Hitler and the Axis don't have to win. And Rick is obviously elated secretly that Victor Laszlo, the husband of Ilsa, is going to be here and is going to like pass his way through and is going to be like ahead of the Germans. What he said, or ahead of the Nazis. What he says is, you know, in his only revealing certain things about himself out loud way. What he says is, uh, they say, "Are you pulling for him to get away?" And he's like, "I understand the rabbit's point of view here, but I also understand the point of view of the fox." Like he's saying, "I understand why you need to get him. I understand why he needs to run." But his real feelings, as demonstrated by one of the greatest endings of all time, are that he actually believes in that cause, and Rick sees in Victor Laszlo the man he can't be, the leader and the inspirational figure that he himself can't be, and they can have the same feelings and the same cares about the world, but he'll never be the man that Laszlo is. And it's recognizing his own eventual shortcomings that eventually, in the great finale of Casablanca. It's the whole thing is, will Ingrid Bergman, will Ilsa end up with Rick, or will she end up with her husband Laszlo? Did she really love him in Paris or not? And it's like, yes, she really loved him in Paris. Yes, she may love him more than she loves her husband, who she thought was dead when she was with Rick in Paris, but then he later turned out to be alive. She may actually love him as a person more, but she respects the husband's work and her position as a thing that inspires her husband, who then inspires half of the world, the free world, to stand up and fight to what's going on. And she understands her greater sense of duty in this moment. And she loves Victor, but she's not. It's clear that it's like it was a cause, and she was young, and she's this person who just like becomes a part of the fabric of his life. But the real heart of her, the person where the world hadn't been on fire at the time and things weren't what they were, would have preferred somebody like Rick and the unknown and the happiness that they had together in their brief little time together. But it was a time of people pulling together, ironically, against a giant threat instead of turning against each other inside our own little country here, sort of like we do now. And the pulling together there meant for Rick to make a personal sacrifice where he would once again allow his heart to be stomped all over, just like it had been before, for the good cause of sending Ilsa away with Laszlo. And there's really a moment. I assert that that Ilsa Lund is in love with Rick, or was in Paris. And there's a moment where she's clearly pretending with Rick that they can rekindle this old thing. It's not something that's going to viably come back. She knows that he has these exit visas, and she pretends to be willing to let Rick take her away with them, but really she only intends to pull a gun on Rick and steal these visas, these letters of transit, and take them away with her and her husband. And that for me was like the that was the final proof that in the end She really belonged with Victor Laszlo. Even though the love story with Rick is really important and a big piece of her life is actually with Laszlo and on the run and being this symbol and being this person. And she knows it and she accepts it and she's willing to do anything for that cause. But the great thing that turns out for her is that she didn't have to, that Rick finally, in the end, after we know very little tangibly about him, shows himself as the human being we think he was, as the sentimentalist, as he's called out to be at the end, by shooting the terrible Nazi and collaborating with the Vichy Louis on helping Victor Laszlo and Ilza get away on a plane together, stranding himself now, no longer owning his bar, no longer having like an ostensible mission in life, without the woman that stomped all over his heart before and that he meant to be with forever, just alone again and starting over. And what he gets out of it is like the buddy version of this thing, like the buddy part where he gets to end up with Louis. He doesn't walk away at the end with the girl into the sunset. He walks away with Louis, and the beginning of a beautiful friendship instead of the beginning or the continuation of a beautiful relationship. And the stakes of that and the reality of that and the idea that at insane times in the world, regular people need to make lifelong sacrifices for the greater good feels like a message that like not only makes you cry at the end of Casablanca, but makes you sort of wonder what's happened to us and why are we still that people. And it feels like there's a certain section of people who would exchange their own personal happiness and futures for the well-being of the overall thing. But most of us now have crawled into our own holes of worrying about ourselves far more than the bigger thing, and it's opened ourselves up to a whole lot of danger out there in the world. So anyway, I feel like Casablanca is a movie that like it does everything that a movie can do. It gives you romance, comedy, songs, really heartfelt feelings. Like we didn't even talk about some like just real quick. I know we're getting past our hour here, but there's a scene in the movie about a third of the way through, and Rick has not shown his hand yet as being pro or anti anything. He's always just been pro himself and his business. But the Nazis are in his bar and they're singing their Nazi song, and the French got are there, and all the other Europeans, and Victor Laszlo, the freedom fighter, has just arrived. And as the Nazis are singing their little beer hall songs and really sort of trying to dominate the scene like they do, and there's like six of them. It's not even a big crowd, but they're louder than anybody else, and they're dominating, and everybody feels uncomfortable. Victor Laszlo steps up, tells Sam, the piano player and the band, to play La Marseillaise, the French national anthem. And there's a really telling moment where Sam looks to Rick, Humphrey Bogart, for permission to play the song, and Bogart gives him the nod, like it's okay. And at that moment, a third of the way into this movie, you're like, I know this guy. I know him. He's on the right side. He really does care, despite what he shows. He cares. And they perform La Marseillaise, and it's really moving. And there's a guitar playing young woman in the movie who's like the singer, and her performance in particular is just really rousing. And you see the Nazis at first try to counter, and then just get overwhelmed by so many voices singing this song of freedom to stamp down their little six people attack on it. And that's a really telling thing to me. And I hope that today I hope there's a Rick out there giving the nod to play it, and I hope that there's a Victor Laszlo out there leading the chorus and standing up and singing it for everybody, because it would be a really nice time for those people to come along. It would be nice to have one in our industry. It would be nice to have one in our world in general. You know what I mean? But anyway, uh, it's a great movie. I didn't get to have the time to get as far into it as I wanted to, but I think we're going to maybe try to add a second one this week. And if we add a second one this week, I might continue along, because there's so many things to pull away at and to dig in with this thing. If you really want a great, like Jodie Foster in Contact would say, primer in screenwriting and star parts and actor bait and motivating the audience to care and showing an audience how they can doubt somebody forever, or care about somebody but doubt that they're good enough to be the person to win in the situation where you are. You can't ask for a more beautiful example than this movie. It taught me a million lessons about dialogue, about character development, about integrating world plot into the personal problems of your characters, about making sure that your characters are interwoven with the plot at all times as you're moving along. It really taught me hundreds of things that I use every single day, and I think that's out there for you to do too. So for those of you who haven't seen it, I would just give it a shot. You know what I mean? And for the people who have, like, welcome to a club of appreciating something that's coming up on 80 years old. Yeah, 80 years old this year. But it just really can hit you in the heart just as well or as anything from today. So anyway, listen, thank you all for being here. Thanks for coming to support these things. If you could help us spread the word about them, we really appreciate it. Twitter is so wonky and crazy lately. You never know what's going on. And we're trying to convert to more of a YouTube presence. And the great editor, Ken Blackwell, is here tonight, and Marcia. And it's like we've come together as a little team to start putting out regular, professional, good business tip, professional screenwriting tips, techniques, demonstrations, videos to come here, where we can let other people pay for it, right? And we can come here and just enjoy it together. So these live streams are a big part of that. We're going to continue those probably every Saturday night, but I think there's going to be other days where we might be able to get bigger numbers, like Wednesdays, Thursdays I'm here in or something. So we're going to expand. We're going to do a couple of them a week and try to keep them going. Please spread the word. Please come back. Really appreciate you all. It's a wonderful job, and it's a great industry, and even when it's not working right, it still beats the hell out of anything else that we could all do with our lives. So enjoy it. Have a great week. Thank you all very much. See you next time.